Thank the gentleman for yielding back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Weinstein, is it Weinstein? Weinstein.
It's Weinstein, sir.
I beg your pardon.
No problem.
I was hearing you earlier, and I wonder if you could repeat something. You said that you identified a moment in time as giving rise to a recent substantial increase in risk of terrorism. You had said October 7, the Hamas attack on Israel. Tell me again what you said about that. Why do you point to that as the trigger of this heightened risk?
Well,
for the United States homeland.
Yeah, for the homeland. So what we had was the threat lay down that, in fact, we issued our annual Homeland Threat Assessment 2 weeks or so before that. So you can look at that. We lay down the threat, and we determined that there was a heightened threat of terrorism at that point. Then with October 7th, you then have, you've got Hamas attacking Israel, you've got Israel's response, and then different parties' reaction to both of those things. And that has animated activity by everybody from Hezbollah to the Iranian government, which, as you know, and this is public, has engaged in plotting here in the homeland, reacting to Israel, reacting to our support to Israel. We have the Houthis, who are now launching missiles at maritime targets. We have also, and I was alluding to this earlier, this interesting sort of strange connection where you do have some domestic violent extremists here who are not of the...
So I sort of, you're talking about the homeland, I sort of get why domestic violent extremists, if you see an uptick in things around the world, but as Bill Clinton once said, there's always going to be trouble in this old world. I'm not sure that the threat picture changed all that dramatically. It's not a surprise to me that Hamas wanted to do as much harm to Israel as possible. So it's interesting you point to that, and you point to the issue of DVEs. But if we talked about that story about the 8 Tajiks who came in, who you said you didn't want to talk about much here. They're not domestic violent extremists. They're here, and you said there was no. I'll get one thing and see if you can see what you've said about one statement. You said there was no, and the Secretary said there was no derogatory information about them when they crossed the border. I would think being on the terror watch list and being affiliated with ISIS-K or suspected affiliation would be derogatory. Are you saying that information was not available to you when they come across?
My understanding is that when they were encountered on the border and they were, the responsible officials checked the data systems did not have the derogatory information in there indicating.
So see, that concerns me gravely. Mm-hmm. And then there's a news story by NBC News. The chairman said before he walked out for a few minutes that he hopes we don't see another story like that, but there's an NBC News story. DHS identifies over 400 migrants brought to the U.S. by an ISIS-affiliated human smuggling network. Now, I understand maybe the Secretary suggested some of what's in that article is not accurate. What can you say about that?
I think what I can say, and I'm sure that my colleagues will be able to talk about this at greater length in the classified briefing, but that of those people who were smuggled in from that network, which, according to the news reports, has an affiliation with ISIS, there is not information that suggests that those particular individuals are terrorist operatives.
Well, see, there's one thing you didn't say. You talked about October 7, you talked about domestic violent extremists. You did not say, and it's been curious to me as I've sat on this podium for a while, no one seems to want to say opening the doors on the border has exposed us tremendously. In November 2022, Christine Abizade, director of the Counterterrorism Center, was here with Ray and the Secretary, and I asked her if her agency saw a significant threat of terrorism from the historic level of uncontrolled crossing at the southern border, particularly gotaways, and she said, we don't actually. Border security is really important. If we look at the nature of the threat and how it has evolved here in the United States homeland, it has been striking how the evolution to lone actors actually reflects how much more difficult it is for terrorists to enter into the United States. We look historically at the kind of attacks we have experienced here in the homeland. None of them have been connected to major illegal crossings or otherwise from the southern border, southwest border. I think that's clueless. I see stories about Quantico, people probing. I heard a vice admiral on Fox News saying they're seeing probing visits a couple times a week. Are you prepared to say that opening the border has subjected the United States with an extravagantly increased risk of significant terrorism?
I'm prepared to say that we're hyper-focused on the threat coming across the border, and that's why I've detailed all the things that INA is focusing on. I'm also prepared to say that CBP, as I understand it, issues publicly the number of watch-listed individuals that they encounter on the border. So we're not trying to sugarcoat or hide the fact that there's a threat there. In fact, I'm being instructed by my secretary to focus like a laser beam on that threat.
Well, he's late coming to that conclusion, and I think, well, we're going to see, I just think it's inevitable we're going to see in coming years that has been ignored to the exclusion of some other far less significant risks. My time has expired. I'll now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for his 5 minutes of question.